Hey Brian, how's it going, man?
Hey, what's going on? Good to see you again. Another year.
Yeah, Drew
Another
Cliff
year with
Burton Day
Cliff.
all over again. Yeah,
Yeah,
feels like we were just here
yeah,
last year, huh?
yeah, it does. I mean, it's pretty cool, like, since this whole thing started, it's the live event, it was pretty amazing. And
Hmm.
then, you've been able to continue it virtually like this. But I mean, it's kind of interesting, it's kind of been an anniversary, I think, like at least for me, it's been like an anniversary I've celebrated just kind of with myself all these years. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Before Cliff Day became a thing, and it was just the sort of thing where maybe I trade a couple of messages with close friends, and we talk about we. I mean, it's been so long, to be honest,
Hmm.
and but it's cool like how you've created this kind of way to celebrate him, and it's virtual, so like people all over the world can participate. Where I think like
Yeah.
with me, it's been more of like it's like not personal, but like way more kind of insulated in a way. So I
Hmm.
I think like I know like with that first one, the first one that happened in person in Castro Valley was amazing, and it was sort of the one thing it kind of reignited my like feelings about Cliff and like those days and everything, like just being there in person, and the fact that it's continued. It's kind of evolved, I think, in this. I mean, it's evolved into something way bigger. This
Hmm.
whole
Hmm.
this whole event right now, it's so mellow. It's like we're in a rec room in a strip mall in the East Bay, and it's like it's amazing. It's like, but like kind of this, it's like we're 30 years on or whatever, and like here we are, and it's just it doesn't feel contrived, it doesn't feel forced. It's like I don't think it could have happened anywhere else. So anyway, like Cliff Burton, I can't say any more than what anyone else has said, but he was a genuine real deal guy, and it's cool that his memory has kind of stayed that. It hasn't been like tainted by, all the bullshit, internet, gossip, whatever. It's like his memory is still pure, and like to me it's like super special. So anyway, that's it. Like
Yeah, the first one was
traditional
definitely
now.
magical, and eventually we want to go back to the in-person events and do it live as well too. I would love one day to see, a concert there as well, bands like Violence or Exodus play, and just like the cool Cliff Burton birthday party.
Yeah, I mean, it already. I mean, to be honest, like it was hard not. It was kind of more not difficult, but it was a little more. It was difficult. I didn't feel as connected with the
Hmm.
day, with with everything around Cliff and everything before. To be honest, because it was this sort of thing. Like all these years, it's just been it's a date on the calendar, and you know what I mean. And so it's like okay, we
Hmm.
remember Cliff, and then we remember the other dates, but it was kind of a more like I mean, now that it's kind of opened up into like this virtual thing, it just feels, and the whole world's involved. It's definitely given me a new appreciation of
Mm.
what this means. So
Oh yeah, definitely.
no, it just it feels like it's a community. It's a worldwide
Yeah,
community as opposed to like just area codes 408, 510, 415 sort of deal.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
it definitely
That's the
feels
cool thing.
more. Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, it's really cool that you and the family have really been able to kind of keep this going and build it, really.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. And like I said, we hope for it to just get bigger and bigger. And it's really cool seeing the live stream the night of and seeing where people are commenting, where they're watching from, and it's all over the world. So it went from something
Hmm.
just in our own backyards in the Bay Area to a world celebrating Cliff Burton's birthday together. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
I definitely pinch myself that I get to be the one to facilitate this and host this event because all my life I've been chasing Cliff stories around Castro Valley, and now I get to talk to Cliff friends like you and everybody else, and even go and visit places at Cliff, his old stomping grounds and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think we're in the
Right.
same boat of appreciation. Did you get the Cliff beers?
No, like I totally snoozed on it, and then I asked, because I know the Knucklebones people, and like they
Mm,
tried, but it was all gone.
yeah.
Yeah, I completely snoozed. Like I said, oh, like I got a minute or whatever, and then by the time and then I forgot about it,
Mm,
and then by the time I got,
It's all good.
See,
Hopefully,
yeah, same. But
hopefully they'll make
I didn't
more.
get them. Yeah, I didn't get them, but I do have a buddy holding an empty can for me, so I'll add it to my Cliff collection. What I did find recently, though, is I got Sounds magazine from October '86, so the issue they dedicated with Cliff. Yeah, I got a pretty nice copy of that, so I was able to frame it and try to not scan it because it's so large, but try to photograph it as well too to put it online.
Wow, when you do that, let me know because I used to read Sounds religiously back in the day. Like it was a thing where back then I had a job at a bookstore and they made me periodicals buyer. And so like I worked it so like because I was ordering all the magazines for the store, I would order Sounds and like I'd order all the English music magazines. I'd order Sounds and NME and Melody Maker just so I could read them.
Oh, that's cool.
Like no one would buy them because it was in it was in the Silicon Valley. No one knew what the fuck Sounds was, but like
overseas, publication.
Overseas, like no one cared. But like, so I kind of worked it where like I would order the issues and get them and read them myself. And then the way it worked were like any unsold copies, you just tear off the front cover and return it to the distributor, and then the store would get credit. So it's like no harm, no foul sort of thing.
That's cool.
But it's like.
Yeah, I've been on the eBay hunt for just old Cliff stuff. Like, I got a bunch of Metal Mania. Like, I got like 5 or 6 issues for. I mean, it was kind of pricey, but the guy cut me a deal because I was like, "How much for all of them?" So, I got a really early issue. I want to say like Texas, but he did say that he was friends with Ron Quintana. That's why he had so many issues.
I'm always interested in like how or where those things ended up back then.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys sent them all out everywhere. And
well, I don't know how Ron did his distribution, but like when I did my zine Whiplash, like we actually like went to Last Gasp. Well, actually we actually kind of did it legit. We went to Last Gasp in San Francisco, who they distributed all the underground comics in the 60s, like Furry Freak Brothers and all the R. Crumb stuff. And so like they were in the city, and so they distributed the second printing of my zine in like 85. And then before that there was what were they called? There was a distributor back east. Oh, Dutch East Indie or something. They were like the big metal rock distributor back east, and they distributed our zine. And it's weird, like over the years, like in the last 20-25, since the internet, I've heard from people who said that they bought my zine that I did with my friend Sam Kress. They bought it in France. Like they found it in it. They bought, and they still have the issue. But it was a sort of thing like I had no idea all these years like where that distribution ended up. And it 25 years later, 30 years later, I found out like our zine was in a record store in France.
Oh, that's pretty cool. That's cool.
Which is crazy, 1984, 85, like that seemed, impossible.
Yeah, they're not ordering off the internet back then. Like it's all word of mouth, so, international shipping.
Right. That they probably, who knows? It probably went over on a boat. Who knows? Because air shipping was still expensive, but
yeah. That's cool. Were you able to save? Do you have all the copies of your zine?
Well, we only did my zine Whiplash. We only did one because it was a sort of thing where my buddy and I really didn't know what we were doing, and so we just blew all our money on the first issue. And then we, when we started selling them, it's like, oh my God, we're getting this money. Like, let's just buy beer or like whatever. And so we started getting material for the second issue, but we were kids. It's like, oh, we don't have enough money to do another one. But that's where Ron came in, where like I wrote and I took photos for Ron and Metal Mania for a few years. So as far as now, I have all the issues of Metal Mania, and then the one copy of Whiplash. But the Metal Mania issues are still sacred because they're like really a time capsule of the Bay Area sort of thing.
Yeah, the oldest one I have, it has just like this not even a full paragraph right up on Metallica, and says, "Keep an eye on this new hot metal band from LA, Metallica," and that's all it says. And then every issue has
the famous issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it's their first one because it's such a small write-up. And then every issue after that has more and more. And then it has like Dave Mustaine drama with the writers. Like, oh, dude, it's so cool. Just reading all that stuff, dude. Such a time capsule.
And the thing about Quintana was he was like way ahead of the pop culture references, like
Hmm.
way ahead. Like, that became funny and cool in like the early 90s and stuff, where like if you look at some of the old issues of Metal Mania, there was a total sense of humor where he put like the Partridge Family trading cards in the issue, like, because there'd be the Partridge Family on tour, and it'd sort of be like like you'd be reading about whatever, like Exodus and Metallica, da, 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 and then there'd be like a quarter page on like Partridge Family on tour, and you got it because like we were that generation who watched Partridge Family and
Hmm.
all that stuff. But like, when you look at it now, I'm sure people are saying like, what the fuck is the Partridge Family doing in this metal zine? But
Yeah.
that's where Ron was way ahead of the curve with the pop culture references, like how 80s pop culture became a thing.
Hmm.
Every succeeding generation has a nostalgia about something, and like Ron was way ahead of like tapping into the 70s nostalgia, and
Okay.
it just kind of gave Metal Mania a sense of humor, which kind
Yeah.
of totally played into like the drunken sense of humor of everything else. You'd have Metallica on Rampage Radio, and
Hmm.
my friend just sent me a link this past week. A friend of mine, in another part of the country, and he just thought like it was something like it was like a holy grail, or like this forgotten thing where it's this it was a segment from Rampage Radio, and Lars was on Rampage Radio with Ron, and then there was a friend of ours, Andy Anderson, who was part of the scene, and they were like doing fake interviews where like
Mm.
Lars was pretending to be Mustaine, and our friend was pretending to be Kerry King, and they were just talking shit about each other and stuff, and like but that was like 1983, whatever. So like
Hmm.
in that context, it's like a couple hundred people in the Bay Area or San Francisco listening to that and just like thinking it's the funniest fucking thing they've ever heard. But now you fast forward to 2023 and people are listening to it with zero context, and like they don't understand the context, where like
Hmm.
they're just making fun of each other. But my friend was listening to it and it's like, oh my god, like the stuff Lars is saying about Kerry King, and like that guy's making fun of, like it's like now it's like they're the big four, and like there's all this
Hmm.
history around who they're doing, but like it was hard for me to explain to him, like dude, like these are like 19, 20-year-old kids on college radio, just drunk at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, just like making shit up. It's like
Hmm.
it's not like now where like someone's on TikTok or something, and like they're trying to create drama. Like
Yeah. It's
when this was going on, like nobody who knew who Dave Mustaine was, nobody who knew who Lars was, like nobody knew who anybody was, and it was just like four kids at a college radio station, one of them who happened to be in a band, just like having fun. And it's just
hmm.
I think I mentioned to you before when we were talking, like I've kind of been not tripping, but I've been thinking about like just the context of time, like time
Hmm.
passing now, and then like things like that. And like to me, I kind of haven't really thought about stuff like that, but like putting time in context, like Metallica turned 40 years old, the end of last year, whatever it was. And like it's
Hmm.
however many years since Cliff passed away, and like, we're celebrating his birthday. But just the concept of time is not tripping me up, but I'm just kind of, so it's a sort of thing. Here's what I was thinking. So like, 1986 is when Cliff passed away. 1985, 1984, all those years. So now
Hmm.
how many years are we on? Like, how many years is that? I can't do the math, but almost 40
Since he,
years.
yeah.
Yeah, like 40 years, close to 40 years.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I was thinking like, 1984, 85, 86, 40 years before, if we were, when we were that age in 1984, 85, 86, 40 years before that for us was like the end of World War II. Like it was like,
It would have been.
so
It
it
would have
was
been
like
1942.
1942, 1943, it was the World War II years, 1985,
Hmm.
Ride the Lightning Tour, 40 years before Ride the Lightning Tour was World War II. So I
Mhm.
was thinking like, okay, the fact that there's so many people like us, and so many other people are like still celebrating and listening to and appreciating something that happened 40 years ago
Mhm. Mhm.
is like is is really weird in the concept of time, because like if you think back when that was happening 40 years before that, when I was whatever 17, 16, 17, I wasn't celebrating or into music or whatever that was going on in 1945. And it wasn't
Mhm.
and it wasn't sort of thing like now, it's 40 years on or whatever, and it's all these generations now who still listen to Metallica, who still know who Cliff was, who still like appreciate who Cliff was, and it's almost 40 years after the fact.
Mhm.
And so then I trip on, so if I take it back to when, if you think back to when Cliff walked the earth or whatever, 40 years before that, like that was like ancient history. Like, like 40 years before 40 years before the 80s was the 1940s.
Yeah.
And like I'd be shocked if I knew anybody who celebrated or like listened
Celebrated
to
something in the
any
40s.
outside of World War II, outside of World
Mhm.
War II history, because I was a history nut when I was a kid. So
Mhm.
like, World War II, that was kind of the only thing you would be into from the 40s and the 80s. But like,
Mhm.
you weren't into fucking Benny Goodman or something.
Yeah,
Like,
what kind of
you
music
know,
was popular? Were people repping
like
that in the 80s?
well, like,
No.
the big no, you didn't run
Yeah.
into like you didn't run in you didn't have people who like someone wasn't running around in the 80s going like, I saw Benny Goodman
Yeah.
in 1945 and you kids don't fucking know. But like, it's trippy the way pop culture and music and history has evolved, because like, look at it now, like it's almost 40 years after the Cliff days, and there is that person who says like, yeah, I saw Cliff, but then there's like, the 20-year-old person now who appreciates that. And
Mhm.
that's kind of what I kind of thought about, like kind of thinking about, what we were going to talk about this year and everything. We're like, kind of putting it in the, because time's a trippy thing, and especially as you get older. And, I was tripping on like, 40 years before the metal days, like it was the 40s, and like, we weren't talking to nobody, that was like the distance, you know what I mean? Like that was your
Yeah.
grandparents or something. Like, you didn't relate to your grandparents because of Benny
Mhm.
Goodman or something. You maybe related to that generation because of World War II or something like kind of historic. But like
Mhm.
as far as like, or maybe, or movies, of course, like movies from the
Mhm.
40s. But it was like, as far as, the context of music, like, people our age weren't listening to big band, or, it, it's just really interesting, like now, that, in the context of Cliff and the music and his legacy, it is kind of amazing, how here we are all these years later and it's still relevant.
Mhm.
I don't know how other people feel about that, but like, as I'm getting older, I'm kind of tripping on like how certain things that we experienced, or like Metallica, Cliff, other things are still relevant. It's Metallica's about, the summer Metallica is going to play stadiums still,
Mhm.
and they're 40 years old and they're still confident or popular enough
Mhm.
to to have themselves booked into stadiums, and then they're doing that multi-day multi-show tour in each city.
Mhm.
So the fact that, obviously they're obviously the promoters and whoever is back in the tour feels that they can play two nights in a stadium in the same city, and it's 2023, where you look at other bands who kind of hit, who are of their generation, they're playing
Mhm.
fucking county fairs, they're playing,
The local
they
bar
have
and grill.
Lucker Bar and Grill. They're playing the county fair. They're playing,
Mhm.
you know, the nowadays it's like the
Yeah,
casino
the
circuit.
casinos.
And like, it's so like, in that context, it's still fucking amazing.
Well,
And they're releasing. Go ahead.
well, everything that you just said right now is a testament that this was a phenomenon that happened, and the reason why it's so close to us is because it happened. You were at ground zero. You were there during Cliff's first practice with the band. So I mean, the name Cliff Burton lived on 40 years later and is bigger 40 years later than it was back then. And then Metallica still lives on, like you said, playing stadiums, from a small garage rock band in El Cerrito to one of the most famous metal bands of all times. So, as I said, it's essentially a phenomenon that we're still experiencing. And from you to see it from its infancy to where it's at today, I can see why you're going, man, this is so amazing. Like, how is this happening? But that's what happened. It's few and far between. When was the last band as big as Metallica? Led Zeppelin? Like,
If that,
it's all over the world.
I think I've talked about it before too, but like, look, it's interesting to me is I can't think of another band who people want to keep in a certain era.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
it's just like, and well, even the debate over what about the bass on Justice for All? Like, that's still a fucking debate. Like,
yeah, it is.
people like, it's generational. It's like multi-generations have argued that, which is bizarre to me. Like, it's truly bizarre to me. We're like, that was an album from 1988, and like people are still debating the bass or not, or no bass on that album. But and I talked about it before. I don't know if it was with you or and something else, but it's always fascinated me with at least Metallica, where I can't think of another band who people want to keep in that one era. Like, Hetfield would playing Eat Fuck.
Yeah, I want the Justice for All mighty Het.
Yeah, I want James playing the Eat Fuck guitar. I want Lars playing the Tama kit with the Danish
with
flags
double
on
bass,
it.
Yeah.
Yep, I want the Danish flags on the kit. I want Kirk to be playing, that guitar. It just trips me out that like there's been multi generations who have argued and debated and wanted to keep the band in a certain era.
Yeah.
But then meanwhile, the band's like doing their
way
own
out
thing.
there, way gone.
Doing their own thing. And like I think I might have mentioned it last year, but it's the sort of thing where like I realized like, people gravitated to Metallica because they always did what they wanted. They didn't give a shit. They didn't give a shit. They didn't do MTV. They wore ripped jeans on stage. They just did what they fucking wanted. But then when the masses bought into that, they started to do their own thing again. Whether I liked it or whether, for Load, Reload, they got haircuts, whatever. I wasn't into it. But when you look back on it, they were still doing their own thing. They were doing what they wanted. And then they've always done that. And the fact that people like are still debating whether they still hold them up to, well, it's not what they were doing in 1986, but like, who the fuck, what is doing what they were doing in 1986? And if you're still doing what you were doing in 1986, you're like a coal mine, like you're like a coal mine you're like a coal mine versus Wi-Fi at this point. So it's always fascinated me, like you meant to your point, like maybe the perspective I have on this. And it's not the sort of thing where like, Metallica is my be all end all, and like that's all I'm into. In my life, I've moved on, and like I listen to a lot of different kind of music. I have a lot of different other interests, but of course Metallica is still, and the Cliff days are still very sacred to me because of what they meant to me in those formative years. But it's just, again, it's just very fascinating to me. Like, I cannot think of another band who literally generations of people have tried to pigeonhole into the days when the band was like 20, Cliff was 23, 24 years old.
Yeah.
James, up until when James was 28 years old. Like, They want to keep this band pigeonholed into everything about them when they were all in their 20s. And so like when you
Yeah.
think, if you pull back with perspective and like, if you have some kind of cognitive skills, I think like, okay, so like what you're saying is everything that is relevant with this band was only what they did in their 20s. So like how does that reflect on your life? Like, okay, is everything, it's that old jock mentality, like, that fucking, we won the
High
state
school
championship,
football.
high school fucking football, we won the state championship, and like that was the greatest time of my life. And like if that's the mentality you have, and like,
Yeah.
and if that kind of how that's your worldview, I mean, more power to you. I'm not going to be judgmental,
Yeah.
but like, come on, dude. Like, if you're judging, if you're, and then, but at the same time, a lot of people claim like, they're the biggest, whatever.
Mhm.
They still claim to be fans of the band and Cliff and Legacy, but when when you look at it from the other viewpoints, like, so you're holding your opinion about everything this band is doing to when they were in their 20s. So, what else do you use that? Do you use that uh, microscope on everything? Because if
Yeah.
so, that's kind of fucked up. I'm sorry, like So, but then that's kind of my pessimistic side. But then on the positive side, it's like when you look at it, like it was a magical time. Like Cliff,
Mhm.
the very brief few years that Cliff was with the band and creating music, like it kind of set the foundation for everything. Like the band is still like they're booked in the 80, 60, 80, 50,000 seat stadiums.
Still
And
closing with those Cliff era songs.
yeah, and like I said, like someone 17, 18. Well, the Stranger Things phenomenon.
Master
Like,
Puppet's more relevant than
come
ever
on,
right now.
come on.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Again, there was a, I know, I obviously I saw the shit talk, like, the gatekeep, people want to be gatekeepers and all that, but
Mhm.
it's fucking amazing. Like,
Oh, for sure, for sure.
straight,
A song from
the band,
1986.
a song for 1986 is relevant in a huge pop culture moment.
Mhm.
Like
Trending
in
on TikTok.
trending on TikTok in 2022.
Yeah, a
Like
song Cliff
that's
helped compose trending on TikTok. That's
and
mind-blowing.
and to be honest, like I watched the show, and it was done respectfully. It was
Mhm,
done in
mhm.
it was the way the show used Master of Puppets was in context.
Yeah,
It
the
wasn't
show took
it
place in
wasn't
'86, correct?
or in that era, but it wasn't like
Yeah.
you know Tesla was driving down the street and they're like playing Master of Puppets.
Mhm,
Like it was like in context of what the show was about. So,
mhm.
again, like it's that sort of thing where like it fascinates me that that era of the band is still relevant in in uh in a channel or whatever that we couldn't have even imagined back
Mhm.
then. It's like streaming TV. Like you can watch television on your phone.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, you know, you know, like that sort of deal. So, and the fact that, something that the band did during the Cliff days was relevant to something that's popular now in that, the Wi-Fi streaming 2023 context is pretty amazing. It's not like, where a lot of things from that era, it's like, look how ancient this is.
Mhm.
Like look at this VHS tape, Poison. Like it's like,
Yeah.
and like it seems like ancient history and just something like, oh, that's quaint. Like
Mhm.
we'll listen to that Skid Row song because it's like, oh, it's like that's what they were doing in 1988 or whatever. But it's like, are you listening to Skid Row now or like any of those bands from the 80s?
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
exactly.
so it's just, again, like I mentioned, like I've been tripping on like kind of the concept of things in context with like passing years or like time,
Mhm.
because maybe that's what happens as you get older, like I am. Like it's sort of thing where like you kind of think of things differently. and it's trippy to me because I lost both of my parents recently, and they
Hmm.
lived through different generations of things, and they saw things for the first time, that I take for granted now.
Yeah,
They saw uh,
they saw
airline travel.
segregation.
They saw segregation. But just things that just kind of affected their everyday life just became
Hmm.
commonplace for us, like
Oh
air
yeah, like
travel.
even yeah.
like air travel, air travel back in the in their time, it was like a luxury thing, like only rich people did, or telephones, or
Yeah, now we got it
television.
in our pocket. Now we can FaceTime each other like
You
in
could like
HD, like
what we're doing
video
right now, like
calls. Yeah, exactly. We're doing
video,
what we saw in The Simpsons in the night in '92, thinking that was the
right?
future.
Or it's a sort of thing where you're bored and waiting for a doctor's appointment, and you can watch television on your phone while you're killing
Hmm.
time or something. It's like, it's just that sort of thing where I kind of was thinking about, things like my parents saw when they were my age up until they were adults. Like, you know, it was earth shattering. But then, like in our lifetime, it seems like even more earth shattering things were like, with technology and stuff. But then
Hmm.
again, things that were happened, in the '80s before all this stuff is still relevant. It's not like it's looked at like, like Master Puppets or like all the reissue albums. They're not looked at. It doesn't seem like they're perceived as like something your grandfather only your grandfather. It's not a Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young reissue, or it's not like like a Bob Dylan reissue.
Hmm.
I'm not saying I wouldn't appreciate that, but there's certain things that when how the music is being regurgitated and reissued. It's just like here, off the master tapes on you know free range vinyl from
Hmm.
Peru. That's how they repackage shit. How they repackage music. In these nice vinyl reissues, and it's
Hmm.
just like some of them just seem so cynical and like just so like whatever. But then if it's done with the right context, it works. And
Hmm.
again, I'm coming back. I go back to like Metallica, the reissues that they did with the box sets, they were done right. And I
Hmm.
think like especially the first three albums with the Cliff years, like they were. I didn't. I thought I was jaded, and nothing would kind of not impress me, but that I would feel nothing would be a time machine. Like that's
Hmm.
I never. I didn't. I sometimes I don't think like anything around at least Metallica can be a time machine for me anymore. But like
Hmm.
the way they did the reissues, especially the Cliffier ones, it was. They involved the right people, they included the right material,
Hmm.
and and like you know, it was done. For someone from my generation, it was like a time machine. But then just looking at how maybe the reaction from the younger generation was, it was a way for them to discover what was going on. Maybe that all ties back into like Master Puppets being on Stranger Things.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, it's just crazy that Master Puppets is so relevant and so in the forefront 40 years later that, like, yeah, we're seeing it on TV. It's popular. It's a popular trend to play music videos too. And it's just like that album to me is held to the highest standard. And no other band has taken that place of my favorite album, Master of Puppets. Like, where does that album lie in your favorite albums of all times? Not just Metallica, but out of any band.
to be honest, my favorite album is Ride the Lightning.
Okay,
That's
yeah.
my
I mean,
that's my
that's always a close
yeah.
like.
That's my favorite Metallica album. I mean, it's always
Hmm.
hard to. It's always day to day. You can
Hmm.
ask me one day, my favorite album will be like Exodus, Bonded by Blood,
But one of those
or it might
three
be, or but it might. I mean, as far as Metallica, like Metallica is like Ride the Lightning for me because that's
Mhm.
kind of when I was around the band the most. and for a myriad of reasons. But it's just interesting to me again, like it's a sort of thing where like multi generations are appreciating it. Like every once in a while, like I'll go on to like Reddit, and there's the Metallica subreddit, and then some of the debates on Reddit are some I have to read them like 3 times because they're debating again the minutia of they're debating the minutia of whatever, like again, like base or no base on justice or something. But it's fascinating again to me that it's like it's people, but then when you look at where the people might be from, it's like there's people in Russia, Czechoslovakia, or Hungary, or it's not just like this debate going on between people in El Cerrito and Oakland with someone in LA. It's like the debate is happening globally. Which and I think when like you look at stuff on the internet, it's hard to keep that in context, where like I'm from the generation where like sending a letter to someone in the Netherlands about Metallica and then getting a response back from that person in the Netherlands was like sorcery. It's like like how could someone like on the other side of the world be into the same thing I am?
Yeah.
So I mean, again, it's context. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like you seeing the phenomenon of Metallica can be similar to you like watching a sapling, in your backyard grow to like a giant redwood tree today, and that's how you're seeing time perceived, and that's why it's such a strange thing to see.
It is. But I'll tell you, like one of the most profound things in recent years was, the book Murder in the Front Row came out, and our publisher Bazillion Points, their first book was a book by Thomas Gabriel Fischer, who started Hellhammer and Celtic Frost in Switzerland. And his book was Only Death is Real. And his book is like a chronicle of what was going on with his band Hellhammer, and later Celtic Frost in Switzerland in the early 80s. So it's like photos of what was going on in his teenage life and his friend's teenage life in Switzerland in 1982. And so they're one of my favorite bands, whatever. So when I got that book, when Bazillion Points published it, it was like, wow, this is fucking amazing. Like, because, I had pen pals in Switzerland and Germany in that region back in the early 80s. And it was like one of those profound things where, pre-internet, pre-anything, we wrote letters to someone, brought it to the post office, sent it off, and maybe 2 months later, you get a response, but it was someone from Switzerland or something. So his book showed what was going on at the time in Switzerland in the early 80s. So when Murder in the Front Row came out, Harold and I, our book chronicled basically the same time frame, but in the Bay Area. And this huge epiphany occurred when like I had my bookshelf, and Murder in the Front Row and Only Death is Real were next to each other on the bookshelf basically, and I took them both out and I looked at them, and it was a sort of thing where like it was like a time machine moment where like, okay, you look at pages in Murder in the Front Row, 82, 83, Metallica's starting, but we're into Venom, we're into Saxon, we're into like new wave of British heavy metal, and then you look at Thomas's book, Only Death is Real, and they're listening to the exact same bands. They have the exact same Saxon patch, new wave of British heavy metal patches on their denim vests in Switzerland in 1982 that we had in San Francisco in 1982. And it's like it was that sort of thing where like I think no one who didn't grow up in our generation pre-internet can appreciate, where it was like the sort of thing where like there was this movement, there was this thing where like people the same age were finding out about the same bands and the same music through publications like we were talking about before, through things like Sounds, Melody Maker, NME, but mainly Sounds, and then Kerrang, through the British music press. We're all finding out about the same bands at the same time, but we were on the other sides of the world, and we were like reacting to them in the same exact way. Like we were putting patches on denim vests. We were starting our own fanzines. Like we had college radio shows. We were trading tapes. Like that was a moment, you know, it was mind blowing. And like, that's kind of like a story. I don't know if that can be completely told, because it's sort of like, it's hard to put into context in this 2023 technological age where, like, you know, you can see anything at any time on your phone. Where like, it was like this profound thing for me. And this was, you know, within the last 10, 12, 13 years that I had this epiphany where, like, you know, kids in Switzerland in 1982 were experiencing and reacting to the same things we were here. And that included Metallica, because, you know, Metallica was doing their thing here. And, you know, I had pen pals in Zurich and in Germany, Switzerland, Netherlands, England. And I'm in touch with them now, thanks to the internet. But it was the sort of thing, you know, I think Metallica's first European show ever was in Zurich. And Thomas Gabriel Fischer was there, you know, later, you know, he later started Celtic Frost and everything. But his reaction to that first Metallica show was the same that we had here, where it was like an epiphany for him. So again, you know, it's like that kind of what you said. It was like a phenomenon almost, where, or not even almost. It was a phenomenon where it wasn't just like kids in the San Francisco Bay Area found out about Metallica and it became a thing, and then they went to Old Bridge, New Jersey, and it became a thing. But it went way past that, where, like, you know, during all that time, people in, you know, pen pals and other people I know still in Germany and Switzerland and England and the Netherlands were finding out about the band at the same time and having the same reaction. So, you know, and it's the sort of thing, you know, we've been talking this whole time about technology and all that. Like, that can't happen now, because it's the sort of thing, I think, where, like, you know, someone does something somewhere on TikTok or whatever, but then everybody copies it. You know, it's not like, you know, you come up with your own interpretation of what was going on, where, like, you know, back then, you know, you got a lot, you know, you found out about something through fanzines or through the pages of Sounds or you know, the publications, and you kind of still had to use your imagination. Because, you know, you read a review, it's like, oh, you know, No Life Till Leather, like, well, this is the fastest band on earth. But what does that mean?
Yeah, you're not listening to the demo, you're reading about the demo.
You're reading about the demo, but, you know, at the same time, that's how like kind of profound that time was, where if someone wrote in a fanzine in San Francisco, this is the most amazing demo I've ever heard, and then gave their reasons, and someone would get a copy of that same fanzine in New York or France or Germany and read it, and they kind of knew what you were about already, because, you know, if you're already a kindred spirit, where, like, you know, okay, you already had a common thing, you know, you're all in the Motorhead and you're all in the Iron Maiden, you know, so you already had common ground. So then, like, wait a minute, that guy who's in the Motorhead is raving about this demo tape by this band I've never heard of, and he's saying it's the fastest thing whatever he's ever heard, but you have no context about what that means. But if that guy who likes Motorhead likes that demo tape, I need to hear that demo tape.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the sort of thing where, like, you know, nowadays, like, how many likes does that YouTube video have? Like, you know, whatever, like, that band and whatever doesn't have very many likes, so they can't be very good. So I'm not going to give them a chance, sort of deal. Or, like, you know, I think about that a lot, because, you know, for for my line of work, like I look after the social media for my company and everything, and like so we kind of look at those kind of, now it's all about algorithms and trends and this and that and the other thing, but that's how people find out about things now, and it's a sort of thing where like it's like popularity based in a lot of ways, where like when you take it back to the ground zero days of at least metal, it was like more about that kindred spirit. Like, I don't give a shit how many people like it. I care about who likes it.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
as a credible source back then.
As a
now, like you
credible
said,
source.
it's likes.
Yeah, it's likes, it's popularity. I want to be a Kardashian. Like, if a Kardashian doesn't like it, I don't like it. But back then it was more like your peers are especially in the early days, your peers were few and far between. It's like at school, like everybody like Led Zeppelin, like hard rock, metal, whatever was Led Zeppelin or something. But like no one, Saxon, what the fuck is that? Like, or like when you got into that, even Scorpions, like Scorpions, what's that? Like, but then when you found that person, it was like an epiphany. So like, I remember in high school, like, my best friend and I, we had to change high schools after junior high, or after junior year, and went to a senior year. We finished in another school, and we were at the hallway one day, and we saw a kid with a Motorhead shirt, who we didn't know, and it was that sort of thing where like it was a kindred spirit, and it was like that's how you found out about things.
Yeah. I feel like back then you had to work for it more. You really wanted it, you would go and research. You trade tapes, look up zines, like write letters.
And that's what made it, into this, because you had to do the work and because you had to put so much effort into it. How many years on later, I still love so much from that era.
Because it's a special era.
Well, and then like, because I put so much effort into it when I was, I guess it's like anything, it might have been, maybe I should have directed that kind of energy toward becoming a physicist or a surgeon or something, but instead of like the deep dive into knowing everything about Venom.
At least you got your doctorates in heavy metal.
I have my doctorate in New Wave of British Heavy Metal or something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, it's personal to you because you lived it, you experienced it. You were friends with Cliff, you were friends with Metallica and all the bands that came through. So it's something that you hold near and dear to your heart. And for me, living in Castro Valley, growing up there, I was there for the aftermath. Different people coming up to me because I'm wearing a Misfits shirt going, I knew that guy. We weren't talking about the Misfits, we were talking about Cliff. So it's like that's why I hold it so personal, and that's why I seek out every story since I was 12 years old, since I found out Cliff was from Castro Valley. So yeah,
see, that's that's relevant.
I have like a remnants of it, yeah.
But that's relevant. It's like it's not the sort of thing where like you didn't gravitate to something that was irrelevant and ancient, and you know what I mean. It wasn't like it wasn't like you were like wanting to find out about something that was like forgotten or whatever, but it's still a living, breathing thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and especially at that time, let's say 1998, like no mention of Cliff at that time. It was a different era in the late 90s. I mean, new metal was the popular thing. And it wasn't until I would say after the Big Four did I start seeing Cliff become more prevalent again, or even just those first 3 albums. But yeah, in the 90s, it was Load, Reload, and the Black Album was really popular.
Well, I mean, I'll speak frankly, like, in that era, like it really disappointed me. Like with that band, like Cliff was kind of like not forgotten, but it was just like part of their history.
It was something like I had to look at the Master of Puppets booklet to see anything Cliff related at that point.
Right. And that other, during that era, it bothered me. It really did. It was like, and then, even in Some Kind of Monster, there's a scene in Some Kind of Monster where Lars says like, I don't know if Cliff auditioned for the band today, I don't know if he'd be in. And like, I saw the movie in the theater, and that was like a fucking gut punch. It was because
this somehow.
Well, it wasn't even that. It was more like, to me, it was more like how far removed the bands seemed to be from their roots. And like, that was my perception during the Some Kind of Monster era, where like, it seemed like the band, to their credit, they did what they had to do, and like they went to the next level. They really did. Like, you know, their popularity post Cliff went to the next level. But what, you know, but because I was from that first generation, that era, that Some Kind of Monster era, really bothered me that Cliff was like a footnote. And like, you know, it really, really bothered me for a long time because,
Yeah.
but their credit, all came back around. Like, you know, I saw the Big Four show in India and they played Orion. And like, that was fucking emotional. Like, you know, and to their credit, it all came back around. And like, and that, I think that kind of comes back around to like how long the band has been around, their longevity. And like, you know, I think, you know, to do anything for that long, I mean, they're basically doing the same thing that they've been doing since they were 19 years old. I mean, how many of us say that? Like, they're basically they've had the same job
Who
since
had
they
the
were
same
19
job?
years old. I mean, you know, when it comes down to it, how do
Mhm.
you stay motivated? How do you stay inspired? And, you know, they have a whole machine to support. You know, they have crew people, they have office staff, they have, you know, it's a bigger thing. So like it I can see how it would become work or
Mhm.
whatever. But, you know, to their credit, they came back around, you know, and like
Yeah.
you know, to everything, you know. But yeah, you know, just to digress a bit, like during those 90s, like I mean, I still followed things, but you know, I wasn't as engaged because of things like that. Like it's just
Mhm.
like, especially Cliff, because like, you know, there's going to be the endless debate. What would have happened if Cliff had lived? Like, no one will know. We'll
Well,
never
you
know.
you saying that quote from Lars, like if Cliff auditioned for the band today, he might not have been our guy. But a lot of people speculate if Cliff was still alive, he might not be in the band. Maybe he would have done something else. Maybe the '90s sound wasn't what he felt good. I mean, he left Trauma after 4 years. Maybe he could have left
Right.
Metallica after that time as well.
Well, I mean, you know, we'll never know. But you know,
Hmm.
what I've always thought about was Cliff was always the one who was listening to like the next thing.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
he was listening to REM. You know, when REM was first
REM and
starting. You know,
U2. Yeah.
REM and U2, and you know, he was listening to like college rock stuff. Like, and that's kind of, it's interesting because, you know, in 86, 87, 8, that's what I got into, like that genre of music. I was really into like REM and U2 and the Replacements and that kind of stuff. So it's impossible to say, like, you know, he
Hmm.
was 23, 24 years old. Like, who knows? And like, you know, and you kind of have to look at the trajectory of like other bands from that era, you know?
Hmm.
I mean, there are a lot of other bands from that era who got way more popular and they imploded way sooner because, you know,
Hmm.
again, like how can you keep doing the same thing that you were doing when you're 19,
Yeah.
when you're 28 even, not, let alone 59 years old, you know?
Yeah.
So I mean, you know, again, like I think, you know, perspective on what the band is doing now is everything because
Hmm.
you know, and again, it's like what we were talking about before. It's like that endless debate about this band, like people wanting to keep the band in a certain era. Like, just, you know, it's the same thing where, like, uh, it's impossible to know. But, like, you know, if Cliff really was the free thinking, free spirit, don't give a fuck, I don't give a shit person, then you have to think, like, well, yeah, maybe he would have moved on. I mean,
Hmm.
but we'll never know. But that's always kind of been my thought. Like, if he really was into like challenging himself as a musician, challenging himself as a songwriter, why would he want to keep playing thrash metal?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, him just be yeah, exactly. I think he would have grown. Maybe he would have taken the direction of the band and like changed as well too, as far as like writing different styles of music. Um, yeah, you're right. The world will never know, and we'll always
We'll never
speculate,
know.
but
But
we'll never
but
know.
again, but again, it's like kind of keeps the band relevant with this endless debate. I mean, I don't mean
Mhm.
that as a negative. I'm just, again, I'm saying like I can't think of another band and another person who still inspires that level of what if debate.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like it just fascinates me more than anything. It's not like I really give a shit, or like it's not
Mm-hmm.
something I think about all the time, but it's just something that fascinates me, where like it's something that it's perpetual. It's like, it's not like